Hi, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Finding Your Voice podcast. I'm Kay Thompson.
And I'm Krista Helfrey, and we are joined today by members of our OMES Learning and Development team, which is a crucial role at OMES. And we are joined with Tasha, Zach, Christina, and Sophie. Why don't you guys tell us a little bit about your team and what you do for our agency?
Yeah, I think I'll take this one. So the OMES Learning and Development team has a number of services under its wing, including the statewide learning services. So that's where we offer learning and development opportunities to the statewide audience. Yes, that is the 30,000 people audience. And they can come and take a number of classes in lots of different topics at the Jim Thorpe building. And then we also do internal training. So we look after the learning and development needs of the 1,000 OMES employees too. We do them on an individual coaching basis, but then also whole group activities and team building. We've been known to pop into an all-staff meeting or two and sustain the learning, especially of the 5 voices. And then we launched a new service where we can offer the statewide audience actual whole team experiences. So instead of coming and sitting alongside other agencies, which we love, like that's still a fantastic service, they can actually come and experience learning and development in their whole team. So alongside their supervisor and their peers. And we've seen internally that those the metrics of high performance just really rocket when you can offer those types of experiences. So that's really, in a nutshell, what us 10 folk do. And they're a brilliant high performing team. So it's a lot of fun as well.
Excellent. Well, we're here today to talk about one of those learning opportunities you guys kind of developed and brought to the state that didn't really exist before, and that is the 5 Voices program. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and how it came to OMES?
Yeah, 5 Voices really has existed for a long time, but not as we know it now. So it's birthed from the Myers-Briggs type inventory, which is Jungian psychology. So there's decades of global data attached to it, which the Guardians out there love to hear. And so the 5 Voices was designed by Jeremy Kubicek, who's native to Oklahoma. We're so lucky to have him on our doorstep. And that's been really helpful, I think, for all of us learning the tools and learning the best way to implement it to an agency. And then also Steve Cockram, who's from London, which is just a weird coincidence for me that, I've got these 2 chaps who are quite, I'm connected to, but only through 5 Voices. And so we discovered it by way of DHS. So huge kudos goes to them because they were implementing it in their agency first. And in a collaborative conversation, we heard about this initiative and what it was doing and kind of their plans for it. And we thought, you know what, that sounds great. Let's see what it would do to our agency, especially with our mission to serve those who serve Oklahomans. We were looking at creating some exponential positive impact by helping the employees, but also them in their mission serving others. The top-down approach is awesome, and we know that leaders define organizations. So we started at the top. This was a good experience. Hey, Christina.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. We did it in sections. We did it in 5 different workshops. And then we knew, just hearing the chatter from our division heads, that this was something we just had to roll out to the entire agency.
And quick. That was the task.
We had to make it sticky. We had to make it work for these teams.
And actually, Tasha has a really funny story about her experience in that moment after we'd done one of the workshops to the leaders, been tasked with, you must implement this agency-wide very intentionally. Now go do it.
We came back
downstairs.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share the story. So I was at my space working, and the 3 of them walk into the conference room in our space. And their voices all differ. We've got a connector, a creative, and a guardian. And so they're all have very good strengths and differences. But what happened is they went into this meeting to talk about how to roll this out to the agency. So I'm working, and then suddenly I hear Zach yelling. And then I hear Sophie, you're not listening. And I hear Christina and I hear all this stuff. And I hear what sounds like maybe a chair thrown against the wall. And I'm like,
I'm pretty sure that was added.
This is my experience. So I felt like, so I'm working and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm relatively new to the agency at that point. And I'm like, oh gosh. And this meeting lasted what felt like 2 hours. And then I hear laughing and I felt like I hear crying. And then the doors open. And so I'm working. I don't want to make eye contact, but I just, I wanted to see if there was blood or whatever. They came out and everyone was happy. And later, come to find out, Zach, as a guardian, was tasked with basically being able to be himself, ask all the questions. How is this going to happen? And they are very passionate. Sophie and Christina are passionate about casting that vision. And so they were able to dream, and he was able to effectively shoot holes through that to make it happen. And we were able to roll it out with great success. Our reviews are phenomenal, and we're all passionate about the content. So
despite his original, no, that's not going to work. What are you thinking? What, you agreed to this?
Still employed.
I mean, I'm still not sold that it worked, but yeah, we did something.
It worked. I think it was a combination of having the freedom to be ourselves, to bring our full selves to the table, and respecting our differences, and also, learning about our people in our agency. So it was an amazing story experience that I tell. If you've seen, been in my classes, I tell that story every time. So.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's so wonderful about us, because we bring those real life stories of why the voices work into what we do. So yeah, there's stories for days, huh?
Some great stories.
So at its base level, it seems like the 5 voices is kind of like a personality test, like you said, the Myers-Briggs. But it really takes that from an individual approach to like a group learning environment where people are kind of designated to one of the 5 voices. And technically we all have all 5. But we have them in a different order depending on our strengths. So talk a little bit more about that like group dynamic and why it's important to have all of the voices.
Is anyone dying to talk about the difference between personality and behavior assessments?
It pinged in my brain, but you go for it.
Well, I think I was put on this earth to say this at this moment.
Everyone, this is her moment.
I don't have anything prepared.
So the reality is that the Myers-Briggs type inventory, which is that assessment from Union Psychology, that is the only personality assessment. And that's because of its validity and the data that's come out of the global assessment. And it's really about using your brain. Now, everything else is a behavior trait assessment. So the 5 voices can often be called a personality assessment, but by definition, it's a behavior trait assessment. Still, I mean, very, very good. And we found extremely accurate, especially for us in the team. But there is that slight difference that we need to pay homage to, I think.
Absolutely. So what was the motivation behind bringing it to OMES, bringing it to state government?
I think it's sticky. So a lot of us have sat through Myers-Briggs. A lot of us, you'd ask somebody, hey, do you know your MBTI type? And they'd be like, yeah, I'm a 7492. And you're like, that's not even in the same ballpark, right? You're not playing in the same game, right? And so we knew that it takes the data from Myers-Briggs, but makes it sticky. And it makes it to where you're like, oh, I am all the 5 voices, right? So not one is better or bigger or stronger or smarter or more compassionate than the other, but I'm all 5 of these things. Where I might be a creative connector pioneer, leading with those voices, I can fully access the other 2, nurture and guardian. And I think that's really what made the difference is when you can value and respect all 5 of those voices, you're more likely to value and respect your entire team around the table, right? You value the voice and the perspective that they bring because it's part of you too, right? Mm-hmm. We can see the behaviors, we can see the similarities, and we can say, I can access that. I can appreciate Zach's questions, right? I can appreciate Sophie's need for connection. I can appreciate Tasha's investment in people. Like I can appreciate those things because I can find value in them myself.
Dig deep, right?
Yeah.
And the 60 plus tools as well. Gosh, I mean, we've got years of content to sustain the learning.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
Exactly. It's exciting from an instructional design point of view, for years, we would seek out the best leadership development tools, books, resources, you name it. And that takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Well, the chaps at Five Voices did it for us. So we're very grateful, because those tools, they are simple. Everybody can, I think, look at it, be able to then Sherpa the knowledge, so teach it on quite easily. And there's one for almost every situation you might find yourself in life.
So this can be definitely applied outside of work in your personal life.
You can't not do it.
Tell us about your marriage, Zach. I mean, yeah.
Do you find a lot of people? do you guys find that a lot of people, when you talk to them after you've trained them, they're like, "Oh my gosh, this just revolutionized my life. I use it outside work all the time."
Most of the feedback we get, or that we hear about having a big impact, honestly, is from the personal life of like, oh, I understand where maybe my teenagers are coming from. Like I have 2 teenagers, and now it's clicking why they are so different. Like you are describing them to a T. Right. And so there's that. And then with spouses, and we found that a lot of times it seems like we have married our nemesis voice, the one that generally drives us the craziest. I think along the row here that's the case with what is traditionally our nemesis voice. And so with me and my creative wife and my guardian tendencies to put her in the interrogation chamber, as we call it, which is to ask a whole bunch of questions, fast-paced. I'm not really looking for information. I'm looking to make her realize that she's dumb.
Right.
And you know, and that brings me to my final question. Do you know that you're dumb? And the Five Voices talks about that, the different weapons that the voices have tendencies to use. This was glaring to me. I said, "Oh yeah, this is me to a T." And I asked my wife, and she said, "Yeah, that's you. You're such a jerk sometimes with your questions." And I really hadn't considered that, you know, questions can be weapons, that they can be harmful. We always hear there's no bad questions, but there are dumb questions, and there are mean questions.
Sure.
And so this helped shine light on that, and me be more aware of my tendency to of treating not just my wife, but others, and putting them in the interrogation chamber. And it has really helped give some perspective on how I interact with my family.
I'd like to add something too. I primarily do new employee onboarding experience with the new employees. So when they come to me to that 1-day experience, it's within usually about their first 30 days with the agency. At that point, they really haven't gotten to know their colleagues well enough to have maybe, you know, non-favorable interactions or whatnot. So when they get the first part of the Five Voices, they primarily understand it through a lens outside of work. You know what I'm saying? And the way that we teach, again, we teach through story. I'm a very relational person, so I teach, you know, and I engage the audience or the participants. It's usually about topics outside of work. We do use work, you know, what they have experienced previously. But honestly, the way that people understand is like, this is our culture coming into this. You've already experienced some of these because of your natural tendencies, what you've done, and maybe in your marriage or with, you know, spouses or kids or whatever it is. People understand that. And we want you to bring who you truly are. Yes, you got hired to do a role, but we also care about who you are as a person. So yeah, whether you look at it through the lens of your spouse or, you know, your friends or family, absolutely, it's applicable in all areas because it's about the behaviors, not about anything just work related.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you think the culture shift that happened at OMES, do you think that's kind of what brought on the Five Voices and...
Flip it, okay?
Yeah, may have some data here. Excellent. I mean, what
Our guardian viewers will love
a lot
it.
of credit goes to Director Harp and his buying into the vision, the vision that Sophie. He got a taste of it, and as a pioneer, he said, "Oh, this makes sense to me. This works. Let's do it." And he was on board pretty much from his day one of getting the information. And he has been a big proponent of ours and our big cheerleader, and helped. Help the culture shift of not just Five Voice. I mean, I'm sounding like a company man now, but Steve has really turned the culture in general. It's not just a Five Voices culture shift. It has been an overall OMES culture shift.
Absolutely.
Five Voices is a part of that overall culture shift.
Yeah. So you have some data for us.
Yes, I do. We can't really ever say that we did this thing because we're qualitative, right? We're not quantitative. And like Zach mentioned, there's been a lot of initiatives and efforts that have connected to what we're doing and also assisted. But let me say, what we did is we took the OKC, so that's the Oklahoma Employee Engagement Survey, and we looked at some very specific questions within that we targeted when we did our implementation. So there was teamwork and collaboration, which was about a 73% in 2020, which is already above the average, which is about 60%. Steve's goal is to get to the 80s. 80s is a fantastic, high performing and very high achieving teams. And in 2021, it was 78%. So in that short period of time where we'd been taking these teams on these very intentional learning journeys, that's quite a big statistical jump.
Absolutely.
Sometimes we talk about just even making 1% improvement. You feel the ripples throughout the agency. In learning and development and what these employees receive, it was at a 60% in 2020. It was at a 67% in 2021. So again, that's a 7% jump. People started to really see what was available to them, those tools and resources, and putting it into action. LinkedIn Learning probably helped there too, which we're so grateful for. And that on-demand learning with the pandemic in full swing really helped everybody, take that shift in their own learning. And then for communication around the whole agency, it was at a 64% in 2020 and then a 69% in 2021.
Wow.
I'm hoping that we have some similar jumps for our 2022 results, because most of OMES at this point
should
is
know who
fluent.
we are,
Yeah.
should know what we're doing.
They've heard
Fluent
from
in the
us.
They've heard from us whether they like it or not. Just kidding.
Yeah, they're either enrolled in the Ascend program, which means they're not just getting the 5 voices, but they're getting content from Franklin Covey, from us when we created it ourselves based on their very specific needs, and all tied in together should mean that we keep climbing that ladder.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great.
Now, what I find really interesting about your team and the kind of learning opportunities you brought to OMES is before I started, I thought of professional development as like my sole responsibility for myself. But what your team brings is that same environment with your whole group of people. And I mean, you're rarely going to work alone. Like at some point you have to network and collaborate, and that's how you're going to see real change. So I feel like this really follows that and aligns with that goal.
Yeah.
So that's amazing.
That's so hard because in the past, we've gone to trainings by ourselves. We've signed up for a training and then we come back and it's, how do I Sherpa that knowledge out? How do I share those light bulbs that I had with this team, that they didn't go to this training, they didn't hear the speaker, they didn't feel the feelings or think the thoughts, right? So how do I get this information out? And so I think that's the greatest part about working with these teams in their work units is that they are problem solving live. They are talking about real issues, whether it's capacity or efficiency issues or communications or having the tough conversations around a meeting. And they're going through it together. Some aren't very happy about it, but most are, and that outweighs the ones that aren't. And we're showing them that we are here to listen, we are here to care, we are here to chief them along to help shepherd that information so they have the tools they need the next time that issue comes up. They know how to problem solve it on their own, or they at least know who to come to ask.
And they are going through it together, but it's really centered around self-awareness. So each person has that moral responsibility to be aware and self-aware. And then we take that into relationship with others, be it in the workplace or outside of that. So when we understand, we convey the message, hey, when you know yourself and lead yourself well, you can then interact with people in a more healthy way. And that's the message, that's the crux of the 5 voices.
Yeah.
But the journey to becoming the best you or a high-performing team can often be a really tough one too.
Yeah,
So we like to own that narrative as well. Like, this is a journey. You may feel uncomfortable. If you don't feel uncomfortable, why?
Right? You should be
What are you
vulnerable.
not doing?
That's
We
when
like
they
to
avoid
say-
our eye contact. As a facilitator, we know when they're not looking at us. And that's
Yeah.
okay. We gently nudge them.
And it is gentle because there's that 70-30 split. You know, about 30% of uncomfortability is something that we think that you should handle and also almost embrace to be able to grow in that space. And finding out what it's like on the other side of you, it's not ever going to feel good when it's a negative experience.
Right.
But without that feedback, what's next, right, for you? So
Yeah, in the hero's journey, that's referred to as like the mirror moment.
Yeah.
Where you're like in that like blacked out pool and looking at your own reflection. Like, what am I doing? Am I going to have a psychological death and become someone new? Like from this point forward, everything's changed.
So that's what you get in our classes.
Yeah.
Psychological death.
You're the hero of your own story.
So I heard, Luke, is that Luke looking into?
Yes, that's actually a really good example. Yeah, Star Wars does really good mirror.